Welcome, Chris. Welcome to Leadership Inside Out. Today, we're going to be talking about your career, about your interests, and given your background, I know it's going to be an exciting session. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for inviting me. I guess by way of a brief introduction, so my name's Chris. I'm a director at Grant Thornton UK LLP, and I'm the head of arbitration there. So my day job is acting as an independent expert, assisting clients who have legal challenges where they may have suffered some loss of profits or want a business valuing in the context of international arbitration or litigation. Outside of kind of my day-to-day role, I also am involved in our LGBTQIA plus network at Grant Thornton. So I sit on the steering committee and also the Inclusion Advisory Board, which is a diverse group of people from around Grant Thornton in terms of different service lines, different officers. And we work alongside our senior leadership team to ensure that when they are making kind of big business decisions, that they are hearing from a diverse range of people. And then outside of kind of my full day job, I've also been involved in a charity called Diversity Role Models, who have a goal of tackling LGBTQIA bullying in schools by going in, having volunteer role models go in and workshops with school children. So I was a trustee of Diversity Role Models for nearly 4.5 years. And recently stepped down from the board, but continue to be involved with the charity.
Wonderful. Yeah, and as I said, a sort of amazing background and where you've got to. Do you mind if we sort of roll it back, right back to the beginning? And you know, how did you end up in these roles that you found yourself? I mean, you know, where did that start? Back at school, back in your earlier life, your first job?
Yeah, so I think as a school child, I think I remember telling my mum that I wanted to be an accountant, and I'm not sure at the time I knew what an accountant actually did. I don't think we knew anybody who actually worked as an accountant in kind of the family or kind of sort of my family's close friends. But I was good at maths, so I set myself that goal. And then studied a degree in accounting at the University of Sheffield, and then went on to do my professional qualification. So I became a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and qualified as an accountant back in, I think I was admitted into the Institute nearly 25 years ago now. So it's been a little while. And so after getting into kind of accountancy, I realized that kind of auditing, which is the sort of service line that I qualified through, probably wasn't for me. And I went to try a couple of different things around the firm that I was working with, and I landed in kind of a forensic accounting area and really liked kind of doing the dispute work, helping people kind of overcome their sort of challenges that they were facing on a kind of legal perspective.
Wonderful. So, I mean, forensic accountancy, I mean, that sounds very technical, but the way that you've just described it suggests that there's a lot of interaction, a lot of human connection with that.
Yeah, so especially kind of the work that I first started out doing, which was a lot of loss of earnings and pensions for people who'd had sort of quite severe kind of life-changing accidents, where they would kind of not necessarily be able to work either ever again, or would be able to work but in a kind of very reduced capacity, and you're looking at their loss of earnings potentially over their kind of lifetime. So obviously need to be quite sensitive when you're kind of dealing with kind of people who've suffered those sorts of injuries, where you're having to kind of find out what their job would have entailed, where they would have ended up had they not had the accident, and comparing that to the position they're in now. And that's basically the assessment for kind of loss of sort of somebody's earnings, is to look at the difference between the hypothetical position and the actual position. But yeah, it's a lot of people skills. It's not just number crunching and Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's funny, I mean, I come from a family of accountants, or my father's an accountant, so it always surprises people that there actually is a lot of human interaction in most accountancy roles. So it's interesting to see that, forensic accounting is so heavily weighted towards that.
Yeah, and a lot of it now, at least at kind of my level, is more report writing and communication than the actual kind of number crunching. So it's being able to explain sort of financial or accounting concepts in a way that's accessible to people who aren't accountants. So either the lawyers that you're working with, or the judge if it's a court case, or an arbitration panel if it's an arbitration case.
Right. And how, you talked about moving from audit into, forensic. Was that a difficult transition? What did that look like for you?
So it was relatively straightforward for me. The firm that I worked in kind of had various different departments, and they were very supportive of people kind of finding their own role within the team. And the first partner that I worked for, so where I was completely new, had not done any kind of forensic accounting work before, was very supportive, kind of took time to sit and explain kind of the basics and why he structured his reports in a particular way, and kind of encouraged me to have that kind of problem solving, sort of logical kind of approach to trying to kind of work out what the correct answer to these assessments are. Obviously, you can have an expert accountant on both sides, because there will be differences in opinion, kind of making sure that I just had the support sort of from him personally, and the firm kind of more broadly, made it a very easy transition.
Wonderful. And you've just joined Grant Thornton as well?
So I've been at Grant Thornton for about 2.5 years now, and I've been the head of arbitration for a year. So leading our kind of efforts in the arbitration space from a forensic accounting perspective, encouraging kind of my junior colleagues to think about sort of moving their own careers sort of forward and becoming a testifying expert, which is the most stressful bit of the day job.
Right. And how did you find, I mean, that's two transitions in very quick succession. How did you find that?
So I've really been supported at Grant Thornton by the partners in the department that I work for, but more broadly the firm. So before I joined Grant Thornton and was looking to move, I met with not only people who I would be working with on a day-to-day basis, but I met people from the steering group of the LGBT network, to make sure that the firm was one that I would feel kind of comfortable and supported in.
Right.
Because for me, that's just as important as kind of the day-to-day team that you're working with. And yeah, I've settled into Grant Thornton really well. I think I'd been there about 3 months when one of the partners in a meeting described me as part of the furniture. So I took that as a compliment as to kind of how well I'd fitted into the team, and the sort of the team viewed me as well.
Wonderful. And it sounds like you did a lot of research before joining.
Yeah, I think if you spend a lot of your day with work colleagues, so you want to be in an environment where you're going to not only kind of feel accepted and supported in the work that you're doing, but actually sometimes have fun doing it. It's a kind of, it can be a very stressful and pressured job at times, but kind of working alongside people who you sort of get on with and trust, and sort of really respect kind of their expertise and input into your work is really helpful. Yeah, when I act as an expert, the report goes out in my own name, so it's a very personal thing. But obviously, you're working as part of a team, so kind of having the sort of trust relationships with the people who you're working with is really important. So that's why I sort of did that research beforehand.
And how do you go about building that trust? How do you create that environment?
So for me, on a kind of a new expert assignment, it would be sitting down with the team who I'm going to be working with and hearing kind of their thoughts on how we would approach the sort of the report that we need to write and the calculations that we have to do, and finding out kind of what their kind of strengths are, any goals that they have in terms of things that they want to try and do from a work perspective, so I can help them develop rather than just giving them the same sorts of things to do because we know that they're good at that. So kind of encouraging people to kind of push themselves a little bit, but knowing that the communication between us is good enough that they would sort of come to me if they have issues, or at least kind of where they think there might be something that we need to discuss, having them come with their own thoughts on how to approach it rather than sort of me just dictating what needs to be done, and kind of working in a collaborative manner, recognizing that at the end of the day I will be the one sat in front of the tribunal or in front of a judge being questioned on the report whilst they get to sit and watch.
Wonderful. And I know we've talked very briefly about your charity work. I mean, do you mind me asking, how did you come to that? Because you've got two big groups there that you're talking about. You've got, young people, you've got LGBT as well. So that's quite a powerful mix that you're operating in.
Yeah, so I got involved with diversity role models during the first COVID lockdown. So right. I probably had a little bit more time on my hands in terms of working from home, not having any kind of social life because nothing was open and you weren't able to see people. But also because the firm that I was working at the time was much smaller than where I am now. So they didn't really have kind of an LGBT network. So there were only 50 people in the London office. So it wasn't big enough to kind of support sort of broader kind of firm-wide diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I felt like that was something that I was lacking from my day job and wouldn't be able to get from my employer at the time. So with their support, I applied to become a trustee and director at Diversity Role Models, and then was part of the board for about 4.5 years.
Wow. And I mean, you must have come across some amazing things over that time. Any insights or thoughts about that period, about the help and the support that you were able to give?
Yeah, so I think the things that stood out for me was going through the interview process with the charity itself to become a trustee, and being asked why I wanted to be involved, and recounting kind of stories from my own time at school where I was bullied for being gay. And it must have been approaching kind of 35 years kind of previously, but it was still very emotional to talk about. So being able to kind of get into a role where I could help support in a more meaningful way people going into schools and doing the workshops with a view to kind of tackling LGBT bullying. I was like, even if this only helps a few children, if they don't have to go through what I went through, and they don't have that kind of emotional triggering feeling 30 years later, then it's worth it. So the sort of fantastic kind of stats coming out of the charity in terms of the number of workshops that they've been running, and just their resilience sort of going through COVID, where they obviously weren't allowed into schools, and pivoting to sort of more online sort of virtual training, and then getting back into schools, and just kind of some of the stories and the feedback that comes out of the workshops that we get to see is just really kind of heartwarming, that there are people out there who want to kind of change the world for the better, for not just LGBT plus school children, but anybody who might be facing bullying for whatever kind of reason.
Wow. I mean, that really must be quite a spiritual thing as well, if that's a way to put it. It must be very uplifting.
Yeah, I mean, it does give you, when you kind of see some of the great feedback that's coming out of those sessions, it's really heartwarming to think that a school child might not go through what I am and a lot of the other trustees have experienced through their kind of school lives. So yeah, it does give you that warm feeling. And the kind of the volunteers who work with diversity role models, I have full respect for them, because I don't think I could go back to the school that I went to and do a workshop on being gay and being bullied for it, because it would just be a bit too emotional for me. So yeah, just sort of full of admiration for kind of the people who volunteer for the charity, as well as those kind of people who work there and it's their day-to-day job.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? I mean, just you come across these different instances of people just giving back. And as I sort of explained just before we started, I mean, one of the reasons I started this podcast was for that very same reason. People giving me time when I first came to this country, came to the UK, didn't get paid, didn't do it anything for any other reason than just they saw someone that needed a little bit of help, and they're prepared to put themselves out there. So wonderful. If you look back over that time, any advice for somebody? Any advice for a young adult, or child going through school?
Yeah, I think speak up if you're being bullied. It's something that I never felt comfortable doing. But I would hope nowadays that there are kind of better mechanisms in schools to deal with that sort of thing. I mean, I went to school when Section 28 was in place, which was a piece of UK legislation that effectively prohibited the promotion of LGBT people. So a lot of schools just didn't speak about anything to do with that. So it felt very isolating. So yeah, to speak up and try and get it sorted, and find supportive teachers, classmates, it does get better. Diversity role models didn't exist when I was at school. So the fact that it exists now, along with other charities who do similar kind of things for either for LGBT people in schools or kind of higher education, or other charities that sort of try and tackle bullying and sort of difference on other diversity indicators, is really good. So there is support out there. So find that support.
Wonderful. And the role models, is that, I mean, it sounds like the charity was providing not only, practical advice, but also role models to students.
Yeah, so I think some of the most impactful things that the role models who go into the schools bring is kind of their authentic stories to the school children, and they explain kind of their experiences and how it kind of made them feel, and the lasting impact that it can have.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, they have sort of such authentic stories to tell, and I think that's the most impactful way of getting through to somebody, rather than just saying bullying's bad, because I think people inherently know that is wrong. But yeah, it's those stories that are kind of the key, I think.
And interesting, Chris, if I could make the observation that, clearly you've been through that as well, and you've also clearly given back, not only in terms of the charity, but the work you've done at your current organization, but also previously. So in a way, you are very much a role model yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't necessarily think of myself as a role model, but yeah, I try and just help support everybody who I work with. And I think what I find useful is I don't look diverse from the outside, especially in a professional services environment. So I'm a middle-aged white man, so I look like a lot of the other people, but I'm from a council estate background in Sheffield. I'm openly gay, and it's kind of my diversity indicators are non-visible ones. So one of the good things that Grant Thornton have allowed me to do is kind of run sessions on the insider-outsider dynamic. And if you're part of an inside group, you don't either necessarily realize you are, or you don't think about how people on the outside might experience things differently. And I think it's a really helpful way of looking at diversity, because it's broader than just kind of the protected characteristics of gender, race, and sort of any disability, sexual orientation, but it encompasses kind of everything that a person is. And it's also a dynamic thing. So in some situations, I will be an insider because I'm a white man, but I'll be outsider because I'm gay in a room of predominantly heterosexual people. But then if I go to an LGBT plus networking event, I become an insider for my sexual orientation. I think the best way of thinking about it is the ticket barriers on sort of London Underground or kind of major sort of transport systems, where you tap your card or phone on the sort of right-hand side to go through the gates. And if you're right-handed, you've probably never thought about the fact that it's set up for right-handed people, but left-handed people will experience it in a very different way. So they either have to have their card in their non-dominant hand, or they have to reach across their body to tap out on the right side. And wow, the number of right-handed people who I've said that to, and they've just never even thought about it. So sometimes you don't know you're on an inside group and have an easier experience. And you can't change the ticket barriers, but at least you can have an understanding of how a left-handed person might feel. So I think that's just a really kind of useful thing. And I have to remind myself to think about that every so often, just to kind of think other people might not be experiencing something in the same way I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's what a wonderful analogy, and it's interesting that you talk about inside out, given the name of the podcast. And as I've suggested, I mean, I'm an immigrant, dyslexic, and from a single parent. So, as you say, from the outside, it looks like white male, but from the inside, we are all very, very different.
Yeah. And I think it's been the most engagement that I've had kind of from straight white male senior colleagues when you talk about the insider-outsider dynamic, because there will be things that they feel on the outside for in a kind of work environment. So we have, I work in an accountancy firm. A lot the majority of the people are qualified accountants, but we do work with other colleagues who don't have the same background, so they might not be accountants, and they sometimes feel on the outside because they're not accountants, or because they didn't go to university and they sort of came through their careers in a different route.
Wow. So what next, Chris? Where, I mean, clearly you're enjoying where you are, but what is the future? What does the future hold for you?
Yeah, so I think at the moment just more of the same. So I like my day job. It's every case is different, so it keeps it interesting. So yeah, I think just kind of getting more experience of being the testifying expert and helping develop kind of the next generation of expert witnesses at Grant Thornton before I think about maybe retiring at some point. I've got a little ways yet, but yeah, I mean, in sort of 10, 15 years, it might not be impossible for me to retire. But yeah, it'd be nice to kind of leave a lasting kind of legacy somewhere, whether that's kind of people who I've helped kind of develop to be sort of the next generation of leaders within the business. Hopefully continuing my support of diversity role models, even though I stepped down from being a trustee a few weeks ago, just so I could kind of focus a little bit more on my kind of professional career for a while. I don't think that will be me going into the schools for the reasons that I said, but yeah, kind of just supporting them and their kind of ambitious goals in how many children they reach each year through their workshops. Yeah.
I mean, brilliant. And I'm not going to ask how old you are, but clearly you have a few years to go before you think about retirement. So a lot of opportunities to continue making an impact on the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an accountant from Yorkshire, so I think I've always had one eye on my pension and when I might be able to retire. So yeah, it's still a little while off, and I think if I continue enjoying the work, that might delay it a little bit.
Wonderful. And if I was to sort of ask you to think back, think to your younger self, advice, what might you tell yourself, of 30, 40 years ago, 30 years ago?
Yeah, so I think going into the workplace, it would be to kind of find a place where you're going to be able to bring your kind of whole authentic self to work. I think the work environment has changed since I first started work. It'll be 26 years ago now, in terms of just firms that have good diversity inclusion initiatives. They have support networks in for LGBT plus people. They have kind of the employee network groups that organize events and recognize that people are different and that people may need kind of support in different ways as they kind of progress their careers. You do spend a lot of time working with people, and it's so much easier if it's an environment where you're comfortable and you can take your whole self to work. It's something that does get easier with age and seniority, I think. Mm-hmm. But I think there's definitely a kind of a shift change in sort of the generation that are coming into the workplace now, are a lot more kind of vocal and comfortable in themselves, which is a really positive thing to see. But yeah, just kind of find a job that you like doing as well, because then it doesn't always seem like work.
Wonderful. It's been a wonderful pleasure to spend this time with you, Chris. Any last thoughts before we finish up?
Yeah, I think if you can kind of sit down at the end of the day and think of something that you've done that day that's made a positive impact on somebody else's day, then it's been a good day. And if you're struggling to think of anything at the end of the day, make it kind of your sort of first thing on your to-do list for the following day.
Nice.
Simple things can actually go a long way. So actually taking the time to kind of thank people you work with for kind of doing a sort of good job. And I think sometimes you can get swept up in the kind of the busyness of your day to kind of not take that kind of 5-minute step back and just say to somebody, this was really good, I've enjoyed working with you, and those sorts of things.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Chris. It has been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you in ways that I didn't expect, which is always a good thing. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the very best in your future. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. It's been good to chat.